Hey everyone, I'm Sinai, your 4-star guy, and lately my character guides have been pretty long. I usually take one video to talk about the teams I think they are good in, and another to talk about their character builds. As much as I would like to make them shorter, I would hate to do that at the cost of being incomplete in terms of what roles they can fill, and all of the items that can complement their purpose. Luckily this week I found an opportunity to keep it short and make it one video. Noelle is a character that I don't think has the flexibility of many characters. That does not mean she's not useful, and she still has a lot of nuances on how to build her. So let's get to know this sweet little maid knight wannabe before we go on a date with this lovely lass. Let's take a look at big ideas we can use to guide our team building with her. Noelle can be a healer and or provide a shield for whoever you want using her skill. She heals the whole team at once, so that means that you don't have to have a character on the field to be healed. Her ultimate also makes her do deal damage and gives her an attack buff based on her total defense stat. She can only heal when she uses her normal or charge attacks on enemies while her shield is active, and with each hit there's only a chance of healing. To make good use of her ultimate, you would want her to stay on the field while she has the attack buff and deal damage to use her normal attacks. I would also like to note that I think her Constellation one is very important if you want to use her as a healer, since it guarantees that every attack she does on an enemy heals while her ultimate and shield are active. Because her normal attacks do very little damage without her ultimate, and if you want to heal, you need the ultimate if you have C1, and use her normal or charge attacks. I think that using her as a burst damage dealer slash support hybrid is the best play, using her skill and ultimate at the same time to try to do damage and heal simultaneously, then switch out, especially since her skill has a long cooldown and her ultimate needs 80 energy to cast. So Noelle will go on the field to use her skill and ult, do damage with the side effect of healing, then when the ult finishes, she'll switch off. If this doesn't make sense to you now, hopefully this makes sense as I show you some teams I came up with as an example. So yeah, what does Noelle need in a team? What kind of reactions can she use? Unfortunately, pretty much only Crystallize is usable with Noelle as a Geo character. When she uses her ult, the fact that she'll be swinging away doing Geo damage all of the time means that it might make other reactions hard to set up. This is because she can probably interrupt other reactions from happening since she would crystallize the enemy's elemental aura before the reaction happens. As for resonances, Geo Resonance is pretty boggers. While we have a shield over our characters, we do 15% more overall damage, and if we deal damage, we decrease the enemy's Geo resistance by 20%, so Noelle's ultimate damage will be better. Not to mention, it increases our shield strength by 15. Nice to keep Noelle's shield from breaking and making you wait for her long cooldown on her skill. Also, I think that having another Geo character is nice, just because they can generate Geo energy particles for Noelle, since, by the way, Noelle generates no energy from her skill to get her ult whatsoever. In my opinion, Noelle needs a little bit of attention when it comes to generating her ultimate. The only other resonance I can think is truly useful is Pyro Resonance, increasing our attack by 25%. Nice. If you want to try out Hydro Resonance, well, that's an option too if you want to boost her healing effectiveness. Electro Resonance doesn't give you an energy particle when you do Crystallize, so if you have 2 Geo characters and 2 Electro characters, well, you wouldn't be able to do any of those reactions to get you energy particles. Cryo Resonance isn't super useful either, since if you're using Noelle's ultimate, when you do Geo damage, you'll crystallize the enemy's cryo application, so that means your next hit is probably not going to get that crit rate boost anyway. In general, it's probably going to be hard to get that cryo application on enemies while you're using Noelle's ultimate doing Geo damage. As for the teams I'm going to be covering for Noelle, take them as examples since I don't think that I came up with all the teams that are good with her. Besides another Geo character, there's nothing that she particularly needs, so the last 2 slots are pretty open-ended. I like to think of the last 2 slots as their own powerful duo. Your teams do not have to fill the mold I'm about to show you though if you don't want to. For any of your teams, I recommend you treat it like you have 2 damage dealers since you would like to have a backup plan in case your Noelle has no ult or want to save it. And in case you are using her as a healer for a different main damage dealer, Noelle will have to take field time away from the main DPS to do her own thing anyway. I think it is best for your team to have a support that is good for both of your damage dealers. Personally, I like to use Noelle to fight large groups of enemies since her ultimate makes her swords reach huge. There's real AoE damage potential there, and she's handy to fight mobs with Geo shields. Enough nonsense, let's just show the teams. I think for Geo teammates with Noelle, the Geo Traveler is great to generate energy. Also, standing in the ring that their ultimate makes gives the active character a 10% crit rate boost. I can also imagine Albedo being useful, dealing passive Geo damage and generating energy while off the field. Ningguang can be okay to use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. Also, her second constellation lets her generate energy more efficiently since it gives you more chances to use your skill. I think the Traveler still is better in terms of energy generation though, I'm not too sure. The Traveler and Ningguang can function as your secondary DPS too. Just make sure that if Ningguang is your secondary DPS, you don't put Thrilling Tales on her since she could use a stronger book for herself. I don't think that Zhongli has any particular synergy with Noelle since she doesn't make Geo constructs, and with her ult she doesn't really need that much crowd control. Any of these Geo characters can also hold the Archaic Petra set, so they can buff the elemental damage of our secondary DPS. As for the last 2 slots, a character like Xingqiu is great. He can do hydro damage with his ultimate as Noelle uses her normal attacks during her ultimate, and he works well as a duel for many other secondary DPS options, such as Hu Tao or Diluc for Vaporize, or with Keqing, Fischl, Razor, Beidou, or Lisa for Electrocharge, or with Childe. If you partner him up with Childe, even though no reaction happens with it, I'm pretty sure he'll appreciate the energy that Xingqiu gives him. And if we use the Archaic Petra set to buff our hydro damage, both Xingqiu and Childe will get buffed. Childe and Hu Tao both have stance changes that have cooldowns, which is where you could use Noelle to keep up the damage. Keqing and Hu Tao could also appreciate the tag out with Noelle when they run low on stamina doing their charge attacks. Fischl is another top contender for a support that works extremely well as a support for Noelle and other characters. She can deal electro damage off field and possibly be that secondary DPS option since her normal attacks are quite strong. She goes well with Keqing, Razor, Beidou, and Lisa since Fischl generates a lot of electro energy over time to get their ultimates up. Keqing and Razor could be great secondary DPS options, and Beidou and Lisa using their ults can provide even more passive damage from off the field for Noelle and whoever your secondary DPS would be. Childe with his pure hydro damage during his stance change can also work very well with Fischl to use a Electro Charge. Xiangling can provide passive pyro damage by throwing out her ultimate and Goba. Her with the Crescent Pike is also a potent damage dealing option, but I've found that to get her ultimate often as a support is hard without sacrificing damaging stats for energy recharge. I like to use Bennett to complete the Power Resonance, generate a lot of Power Energy Particles, and buff our attack using his ult. If you have Constellation 1 on Sucrose, she gets 2 charges of her skill, making her generate a lot of Anemo energy. I think Xiao with his stance change and need for energy particles can appreciate Sucrose, as well as Noelle to take over while his ult isn't up. If your Sucrose is not C1, the Anemo Traveler can generate a good amount of energy, and her C6 also reduces the enemy's Anemo resistance by 20% when she uses her ult. Just remember that you can't have both Anemo and Geo Traveler at the same time. If your last 2 slots have the same element, even though they won't do a reaction, the Archaic Petra set can buff their elemental damage, except Anemo since Anemo characters can't leave Anemo auras on the enemies to crystallize. Let's talk about what stats and artifacts we want to get for Noelle now. Since we want Noelle to do damage while she uses her ult, we want stats like crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent. I also think that energy recharge is nice since her ult can be hard to charge sometimes, but it should not be a priority since you would sacrifice some more useful stats for your damage, and we have a secondary DPS anyway to buy her time to recharge as she tags out. But of course, the strength of her shield, the amount she heals, as well as the damage boost we get from her ultimate scales off of her defense. Having defense is very useful, but at Constellation 4 and below, where you're at talent level 6 for your ultimate, I've noticed that attack investments usually give you slightly more damage than defense investments. As you level up your ultimate, your defense transfers over more to your attack, meaning that at C5, where you get 3 free levels on your ultimate, defense can make you stronger than attack during your ult. C6 also makes it such that 50% more of your defense transfers over to your attack, meaning that defense should always be taking over attack at that point. Not to mention the other benefits that come with defense for Noelle. So for your main stats, I would recommend defense percent for your timepiece, but if you really want to get that little boost in your damage in trade of utility, attack percent for your timepiece could be used when you're at C4 or below. A Geo Damage Goblet is great for your damage during your ultimate, and I recommend a crit rate or crit damage circlet. As for your substats, crit rate and crit damage are great in balance to multiply your damage substantially. Defense percent is great as well, and attack percent and energy recharge are nice. Flat defense and flat attack are nice sprinkles, but they don't contribute much. Elemental Mastery is basically useless for damage, but if you want your shields made from crystallized to be just a little stronger, go ahead. I recommend you try to avoid it though. As for artifact sets, there are only 2 that I think are best for Noelle, the Retracing Bolide set and the Gladiator set. The Gladiator set will let Noelle do more damage during her ult with the 18% attack buff for its 2-piece effect and 35% normal attack damage buff on the 4-piece set. I realized in my last video that this does not actually affect your charge attack damage like I said in my Kaya video. I apologize, it was a careless misreading of the set bonus. Thank you to Louis Rator for commenting on that video and correcting me. But I have found that Noelle's normal attack combo does more damage per second than using her charge attack anyway. I think her charge attack can be useful in situations where you want to heal quickly though, since you heal when you hit enemies while your shield is active, and her charge attack hits enemies faster than her normal attack combo. She gets a slight buff to her charge attack and stamina consumption during it with her second constellation, but I have found that the normal attack still deals more damage. The Retracing Bolide is really close behind the Gladiator set in terms of damage though. Instead of a 35% normal attack damage bonus, the Retracing Bolide set gives 40% normal and charge attack damage bonus. We are still losing out on that 18% attack buff, which is why we are still doing less damage than the Gladiator set. But in place of that, we get a 35% shield strength increase. Very nice for Noelle. This is also an artifact set that you can farm in the domain, so your chances of getting a good set is better than with the Gladiator set you get from overworld bosses. I think the Retracing Bolide is better overall, but the Gladiator set does give you just that little more damage. Personally, I don't think that the Archaic Petra set is very good with Noelle. I think that instead of supporting another elemental damage dealer, Noelle should be treated as her own. Also, it would require using her skill or ultimate to crystallize the elements you want to buff the damage of. Her skill has a long cooldown, and if she's using her ultimate, she might as well deal damage herself. As for 4-star sets, the Martial Artist set gives us a 15% normal and charge attack damage bonus, and an extra 25 after we use our skill for 8 seconds. Unfortunately, her cooldown is much longer than that, and her ultimate also lasts longer, so we won't get that extra 25% very often. The Berserker set, while usually great for 4-star options with its great crit rate buffs, may not be useful as a 4-piece, since Noelle would heal herself as she attacks if she uses her shield. The Defender's Will set is only useful as a 2-piece for its defense buff. The Braveheart set can work as a 4-piece set though. If you need to use these 4-star options, you may want to find a 2-piece mix set that works best for you, but definitely try to upgrade to a 5-star set whenever you can, or just ignore set bonuses altogether and just go for stats on the artifacts. Now onto weapons. Keep in mind, what I am about to cover uses Constellation 0 at talent level 6, and I will talk about what changes as you get higher constellations later. The Wolf's Gravestone is very strong. Even though her ultimate scales her attack boost off of her defense, not all of it is transferred, and her attack is still important. The Wolf's Gravestone has a big base attack percent subset, a passive attack percent boost, as well as an attack percent buff for hitting an enemy with 30% HP or lower. All of this attack is crazy. I think the Unforged is a little better though, in my opinion. The Unforged has the exact same great base attack and attack percent subset, as well as its own attack percent buff that stacks when hitting enemies. And those buff stacks double when the user is shielded, which Noelle can set up for herself. It has a bit less attack buffs, so it is weaker than the Wolf's Gravestone by a little, but it also gives us some shield strength, and its last buff doesn't require us to hit an enemy at 30% HP if they are tanky. The Serpent Spine is great. It has a crit rate subset, and the user gets an overall damage buff for up to 5 stacks the longer you are on the field. The buff stacks only get removed when you take damage, and can even remain if you switch. I think this damage bonus is even more useful for Noelle, since she won't take much damage since she can protect herself with her shield. The crit rate is also amazing. The Skyward Pride is strong itself, having an astounding base attack, a small overall damage increase, and deals extra hits of damage when using her burst. It also has an energy recharge subset, which is helpful, but it doesn't necessarily help it overpower the stronger 5 stars in terms of damage. But if you want energy recharge with a good amount of power, this is not a bad option. Whiteblind is an obvious good choice for Noelle. It has a defense percent subset and an effect that gives her a small attack percent and defense percent buff that can stack up to 4 times when landing hits on enemies. The defense buffs gets the Whiteblind this far in terms of just damage due to the damage scaling on the attack buff during her ultimate. But the defense buffs also improves her healing capabilities and shield strength, so it can be even higher if you value those things. The Blackcliff Slasher has a great crit damage subset. Its potential attack percent buffs from killing enemies are also very strong, but being able to kill enemies is not always viable. Even without its attack buffs, it's still pretty good, and it can make killing groups of mobs easier, but it's not at its full potential against tankier enemies. The Lithic Blade is good, but it's not very strong compared to the other weapons I already covered. It can only get up to 3 crit rate and attack percent buffs. It also has an attack percent subset and just winds up being okay even with 3 leeway teammates. The Prototype Archaic has a great base attack for a 4-star, an attack percent subset, and has a strong extra hit of damage once every 15 seconds. It's just okay. The Debate Club is pretty strong, with its substantial amount of damage from extra hits after using her skill. It just has a 3-star level base attack and attack percent subsets, along with the fact that her elemental skill has a long cooldown, meaning that chances to deal extra damage is not always active. It is an okay 3-star, but once you can, you should try to upgrade. The White Iron Greatsword is a 3-star with a defense percent subset. Even though it deals less damage than every other weapon I already talked about, if you're early in the game and don't have many weapons, it could be usable for the moment if you value her shield strength and healing capabilities. The Sacrificial Sword can be a cool gimmick if you want more chances to use her shield. It has an energy recharge substat and a high base attack for a 4-star weapon. I pretty much think that every other Claymore is not worth considering due to irrelevant substats and or effects that don't help Noelle's effectiveness as a healer damage dealer hybrid. I will quickly cover Constellations since I mentioned many of them already. I think that if you care about Noelle's healing capabilities, Constellation 1 should be important to you, since it makes a healing chance when landing hits on enemies while her shield is active now guaranteed if her ultimate is up. Her second constellation gives more power to her charge attack, and it can be handy in the case that you want to use your charge attack while your shield is active to heal faster, but it doesn't make it your main form of damage dealing. I like her third constellation because the boost to her shield strength and healing is nice. Her fourth constellation is a very nice extra hit of damage. Even though you may be investing in defense, while this instance of damage scales off of your attack, don't forget that defense investments turn into attack during your ult. It's strong, and I find it interesting that it's more likely to trigger the more dangerous an enemy is, since they will deal more damage to break the shield. Her fifth constellation is nice, since the increase in the defense transfer to attack from her ultimate is cool, and her sixth constellation transfers even more defense to attack. Noelle can be a damage dealer without constellations, but she is definitely more potent and she gets more. Besides her second constellation, all the other ones are very nice, and the first and sixth ones are the most notable in my opinion. Because at her sixth constellation, defense is even more important than attack investments, the wipe line becomes even stronger. I would put it in the S tier, probably, if not one of, the best weapons on the basis of damage alone. Little note, just make sure that you use your normal attacks enough to get your max buff stacks before using your ultimate and skill, so you get a higher defense stat to buff your attack, and have more damage absorption on your shield, not just for any specific constellation. The Serpent Spine gets even stronger. Why the Serpent Spine specifically? Well, her attack during her ultimate is highly increased from her defense, so attack is not as important to specifically seek out. The Serpent Spine has a solid base attack for a weapon, but it doesn't offer attack percent stats, and instead it gives us an overall damage bonus and crit rate instead, taking advantage of a higher attack stat during her ultimate and multiplying its effectiveness, rather than just piling on more attack like the 5-star weapons. From my calculations, the Serpent Spine is the strongest weapon for Noelle at C6. As for leveling up her talents, it is a preference really. If you care about her supportive capabilities by providing healing and shielding, her skills should be prioritized. But if you care more about her damage dealing capabilities, it becomes a question of whether her normal attacks scale harder than her ultimate boosts her attack. Apparently, her normal attack does in fact scale harder from what I found, so prioritize your normal attack before your ultimate. I almost forgot to mention, she has passives, so her first passive gives any of your teammates one emergency shield that lasts for 20 seconds that has a cooldown of 60 seconds. Her second passive decreases the cooldown of her skill by 1 second every 4 normal or charge attacks, so the more you use her, the more you get rewarded by giving you more chances to use her shield. Okay, that was all the tips I have for Noelle. I think Noelle is interesting, since to me, it seems like the roles Noelle can fill are pretty limited, yet there is still some wiggle room for preference between treating her as a support or damage dealer, but ultimately, she is both at the same time, which I find fun. I hope that my advice helps you guys understand her nuances a little better. Keep in mind that whatever you do with your characters is completely up to you in the end. You may have things that you value that I didn't, or may not have thought of myself. I just wanted to give you guys ideas on what I think is good with her and why, and hopefully you guys have a better idea of what you want to do now. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed what I had to say. I do Genshin Impact tips, team comps, character builds, and the occasional mess around video. Thank you guys so much for watching either way, and see you next time.